The last human anyone ever saw was a merchant in the border town of Fellkeep. He was haggling over the price of dwarven steel, as humans were known to do, when he suddenly stopped mid-sentence. His eyes glazed over, fixed on some distant point beyond the horizon. Then, without a word, he turned and walked away, leaving his coin purse on the counter. The dwarf merchant, Grimbeard, would later recall this moment to the Council of Nine as the first recorded instance of what would become known as the Great Vanishing. That was 365 days ago. Now, the world had changed in ways that none of the Nine Kingdoms could have predicted. Rhaegar adjusted the straps of his enchanted backpack, his dwarven eyes scanning the abandoned human settlement before him. The town of Millbrook had once been a bustling trade hub, its markets filled with the sounds of human merchants hawking their wares and children playing in the streets. Now, it stood as silent as a tomb, yet without any bodies to mark what had happened. "This is the 17th settlement we've checked," Kissin said, his mountain elf features sharp against the setting sun. "And still no signs of struggle, no evidence of magic, nothing." The 7 adventurers had been tasked with investigating these abandoned human territories, not just by their respective kingdoms, but by a deeper sense of unease that had settled over the world. They were an unlikely group: Rhaegar the dwarf, Kissin the mountain elf, Oregon the forest elf, the twin orcs Marn and Varn, Ren the minotaur, and Utchi the snake man. Oregon moved ahead of the group, his forest elf training allowing him to spot details others might miss. He paused by a house with a still-set dinner table, food long since rotted to dust. "Look at this," he called out. "The plates are still arranged as if they were about to eat. Even the chairs are pulled out, as if they all stood up at once and what?" Marn growled, his orc features twisting with concern. "Just decided to walk away from everything they owned." "That's exactly what it looks like," his twin Varn finished, completing his brother's thought as they often did. Ren, the massive minotaur, lowered his head to examine the ground. Despite his intimidating size, he was their most skilled tracker. "The footprints," he rumbled. "They all lead in the same direction. Northeast." Utchi, the snake man, flicked his tongue, tasting the air. Even after a year, certain traces remained. "There's something else," he hissed softly. "A residual energy. Different from any magic I've encountered before." Continued with rich detail about their investigation, the political implications of humanity's disappearance, and the growing tension between the remaining kingdoms. The first part establishes the mystery and the world building, introducing key concepts that will be explored in later parts. The Treaty of Vadis had been their last communication with humanity. A simple declaration of withdrawal, delivered by an ambassador who, in retrospect, had shown the same distant look in his eyes that would later be described by witnesses across the continent. The humans had asked to be left alone, and now they had taken that request to an extreme that no one could have anticipated. As the adventurers made camp in the abandoned town that night, each of them felt the weight of what they were investigating. This wasn't just another quest for gold or glory. They were following the trail of an entire civilization that had simply chosen to leave. The question that haunted them, that haunted all the 9 kingdoms, wasn't just where humanity had gone. It was whether they had left by choice, or whether something had taken them. And if it was the latter, who would be next? The section continues with detailed character development, world building, and the establishment of key mysteries that will be unveiled throughout the story. Each character's unique perspective on the situation is explored, setting up their individual arcs for the coming. Dawn broke over Millbrook's empty streets, casting long shadows through windows where no one would ever wake again. The 7 adventurers gathered their equipment, each lost in their own thoughts about what they'd discovered the previous day. But it was Utchi who broke the morning silence with an urgent hiss. "The energy trace," the snake man said, his scaled body tensing. "It's stronger now." As if what?" Rhaegar demanded, checking the edge of his dwarven axe out of habit. "As if it's responding to something. The sunrise, perhaps. Or..." Utji's forked tongue flicked rapidly. Or as if we're getting closer to its source. The residual energy they'd been tracking had led them through 17 abandoned settlements, each one telling the same story of sudden departure. But here, in Millbrook, something was different. The energy signature that Utji could taste in the air was taking on a distinct pattern, one that pulsed with a rhythm that reminded him of heartbeats. Oregon, the forest elf, had spent the night mapping the direction of the footprints Ren had discovered. Every single trail, he announced, spreading his map on a dusty table, leads to Mount Monolith. Not just from this town, but from every settlement we've investigated. Mount Monolith had always been a source of mystery. Rising from the heart of human territory like a spear thrust into the sky, its slopes had been considered sacred ground by the humans. No other race had ever been permitted to explore it, and now they were beginning to understand why. Kassan studied the map with his characteristic mountain elf precision. The humans always claimed the mountain was just a religious site, he mused. But look at how these trails converge. This wasn't a panicked exodus. It was coordinated. The twin orcs, Marn and Varn, had been unusually quiet since their arrival in Millbrook. Now, Marn spoke up. During the last war, he said, his voice uncharacteristically soft for an orc, I fought alongside a human battalion. Their commander told me something strange one night. Said that humanity had a contingency that would change everything. What kind of contingency? Ren asked, his bovine features creased with concern. He never said. But he smiled when he mentioned it. Not like someone talking about a weapon or a last resort. More like. Marn struggled to find the words. Like someone talking about going home, Varn finished for his brother. The group fell silent, considering the implications. The Treaty of Vadis, the coordinated departure, the energy signatures all leading to Mount Monolith, it painted a picture of something far more complex than simple disappearance. As they prepared to follow the trail toward the mountain, they encountered their first real obstacle. A shimming barrier of energy, invisible until they nearly walked into it, blocked their path. It wasn't like any magical barrier they'd encountered before. Instead of the usual arcane signatures, this one pulsed with the same strange energy they'd been tracking. Utji pressed his scaled hand against it, then quickly withdrew. It's singing, he said, bewildered. Not with sound, but with energy. Like thousands of voices harmonizing on a frequency we can't quite hear. Rhaegar, drawing on his dwarven knowledge of barriers and foundations, examined the structure. This isn't magic, he declared. At least, not any kind of magic we know. This is something else entirely. Something that operates on different principles. The barrier stretched as far as they could see in either direction, curving gently to follow what they realized must be a massive circle centered on Mount Monolith. But here and there, they could see gaps, intentional ones, they realized. Pathways left open, as if inviting them to follow a specific route. They left us breadcrumbs, Oregon said, his forest elf intuition picking up on the pattern. The humans. They wanted someone to be able to follow them. Not to find them, necessarily, but to understand. The decision to follow these designated paths wasn't made lightly. Each member of the party understood that they were possibly walking into the greatest mystery of their age. As they passed through the first gap in the barrier, they felt a subtle shift in the air around them. The energy that Utji had been tracking became more pronounced, visible now even to those without his sensitive perception. The landscape began to change as they proceeded. The familiar forests and fields gave way to terrain that seemed subtly altered. Plants that looked almost, but not quite, like the ones they knew. Rocks that sparkled with unfamiliar minerals. Even the air felt different, charged with possibility. They encountered more barriers as they proceeded, each one requiring them to solve simple but bizarre puzzles to pass through. Patterns of light that needed to be matched, sequences of sounds that had to be repeated, geometric shapes that had to be arranged in specific configurations. None of it felt like magic, it was something else entirely, something that spoke of a knowledge beyond what any of the 9 kingdoms possessed. As they got closer to Mount Monolith, they began finding messages. Not written on paper or carved in stone, but projected into the air itself, glowing with that same strange energy. They were simple at first, arrows pointing the way, basic symbols indicating safe passages. But as they proceeded, the messages became more complex. "Look at this," Kassin called out, standing before one such projection. The others gathered around, watching as symbols and images danced in the air before them. It showed a series of scenes, humans building something massive inside Mount Monolith, generations of work carried out in secret. The images were clearly meant to be understood by non-humans, carefully designed to convey meaning without relying on any specific language. They weren't just preparing for war, Ren said slowly, his deep voice filled with awe. They were preparing for something else entirely. Something bigger than any of our conflicts. The trail led them through abandoned outposts, each one more strange than the last. They found rooms filled with devices they couldn't begin to understand, workshops where impossible things had been built, libraries containing knowledge recorded in ways they'd never seen before. Everything was carefully preserved, but also clearly designed to be found and studied. As night fell on their first day following the trail, they made camp in one of these outposts. The strange energy hummed around them, neither threatening nor completely benign. In the darkness, Uchi's scales began to glow faintly, resonating with the energy that surrounded them. "Whatever the humans were building," he said, watching the patterns of light dance across his scales, "it wasn't meant to destroy us. These trails, these clues, they're not warnings. They're an invitation." "An invitation to what?" Rhaegar asked, though something in his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "To follow them," Uchi replied. "Not now, perhaps. But someday. When we're ready." The 7 adventurers spent that night watching the strange lights dance across the sky above Mount Monolith, each lost in thoughts of what they might find when they finally reached its peak. The mountain loomed before them, no longer just a sacred site but a doorway to something beyond their understanding. They didn't know it yet, but as they slept, changes were already beginning to manifest in their bodies. Subtle alterations caused by exposure to the energy field, preparing them for what they would find within the mountain. The humans hadn't just left a trail, they'd left a transformation in their wake, one that would change the 9 kingdoms forever. And somewhere in the darkness, watching their camp with curious eyes, the first of many mysteries waited to be unraveled. The true nature of humanity's departure was still hidden, but the pieces were beginning to fall into place. The next day would bring them face to face with revelations that would shake the foundations of everything they thought they knew about humans, about their world, and about the nature of existence itself. Morning brought strange changes to the 7 adventurers. Uchi's scales hadn't stopped their faint luminescence, now pulsing in rhythm with the distant mountain's energy. Rhaegar's dwarven eyes had developed an unusual ability to perceive layered spectrums of light, revealing previously invisible patterns in the air around them. The twin orcs, Marn and Varn, found their legendary strength enhanced by an inexplicable lightness, as if gravity itself had loosened its hold on them. "We're being changed," Kassin observed, watching as his mountain elf fingers traced patterns of light in the air, leaving temporary trails of luminescence. "The energy field isn't just showing us the way, it's preparing us for something." Oregon, the forest elf, had spent the night in meditation. When he opened his eyes, they held a new depth, as if he could see through the very fabric of reality. "The humans," he said slowly, "they weren't just living on this world. They were studying it. Learning its deeper nature." Ran, the minotaur, had perhaps undergone the most dramatic transformation. His connection to the earth, always strong in his kind, had expanded beyond mere physical awareness. He could sense the vast networks of energy flowing beneath their feet, converging at Mount Monolith like rivers flowing to the sea. The mountain itself had changed in appearance as they drew closer. What had once seemed like a natural formation, albeit an impressive one, now revealed itself to be something far more extraordinary. Patterns of light raced across its surface in complex geometries, visible only to their enhanced senses. The entire mountain was alive with energy, pulsing like a gigantic heart. As they approached the base of Mount Monolith, they encountered something unexpected, a greeting party. Not humans, but constructs of pure energy, shaped vaguely like humanoid figures. These beings of light approached without hostility, their movements conveying a sense of welcome. "Greetings, seekers," the constructs communicated, not through sound but through pulses of energy that translated directly into understanding in their minds. "You have been prepared. You may now enter the gateway." The gateway revealed itself to be a massive entrance that simply hadn't been visible before their transformation. It opened like an iris, layers of energy and matter folding away to reveal a corridor that seemed to bend the very nature of space around it. Inside, they found themselves in a vast chamber that defied conventional geometry. Walkways spiraled in impossible directions, rooms existed in spaces that couldn't possibly fit within the mountain's exterior dimensions, and everywhere they looked, they saw evidence of technology so advanced it might as well have been magic. "This isn't just a mountain," Rhaegar breathed, his dwarven appreciation for engineering overwhelmed by what he was seeing. "It's a machine. The entire mountain is a machine." The energy constructs guided them through the facility, showing them chambers that told the story of humanity's true nature. They saw records of humanity's first encounters with what they called the pattern, the underlying mathematical structure of reality itself. They learned how humans had discovered that the universe was not one, but many, layered like pages in an infinite book. In one chamber, they found a massive holographic display showing the true scale of existence. Their world, they learned, was just one of countless realms, all interconnected in ways that defied conventional understanding. The humans hadn't just disappeared, they had transcended, moving laterally through reality to explore these other dimensions. "The wars," Marn said suddenly, understanding dawning in his eyes. "All those centuries of conflict. They weren't really fighting us." "No," Varn agreed, completing his brother's thought. "They were testing themselves. Learning their limits. Preparing for something much bigger." The central chamber of the facility contained what appeared to be a massive sphere of pure energy, suspended in space. As they watched, images formed within it, showing them glimpses of where humanity had gone. They saw vast cities built between the stars, civilizations that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, and achievements that redefined what was possible. But more importantly, they saw why humanity had left. The universe, they learned, was facing a crisis beyond any mortal comprehension. Reality itself was under threat from something the humans called the void, a force of uncreation that consumed entire dimensions. Humanity hadn't abandoned their world, they had moved to a position where they could better defend it. The Treaty of Vadis, Utji realized, his serpentine features illuminated by the sphere's light. It wasn't about surrendering territory. It was about establishing a quarantine zone. They were protecting us from what they knew was coming. The energy constructs confirmed this interpretation. The humans had discovered that certain species, including all those represented in their party, had the potential to follow humanity's path of advancement. But forcing that development prematurely would be catastrophic. Each race needed to discover the pattern, in their own time, in their own way. In another chamber, they found what appeared to be a nursery of sorts, but instead of children, it contained seeds of possibility. Each carefully preserved container held the potential future of a different race, showing how they might one day achieve what humanity had. "We're not meant to follow them yet," Oregon said, understanding flowing through him like a river. "This place, these changes in us, they're not an invitation to join them now. They're a promise of what's possible. A glimpse of what we might become." The final chamber they visited contained a message, left specifically for whoever would find this place first. It showed a human child and an elf child playing together, then growing up to become beings of pure energy, transcending their physical forms. The message was clear, the path was open to all, but it couldn't be rushed. As they prepared to leave the mountain, each of them changed forever by what they had learned. The energy constructs left them with one final message: watch the stars. When you see them change, you'll know we've succeeded. Until then, grow. Learn. Prepare. The path is longer than you imagine, but the destination is grander than you can dream. They emerged from Mount Monolith to find that only a day had passed in the outside world, though their journey inside had felt like weeks. Their bodies still held traces of their transformation, but the more dramatic changes had faded, leaving them with just enough enhancement to serve as proof of what they'd experienced. The mountain sealed itself behind them, its secrets once again hidden from casual observation. But now they understood its true purpose. It wasn't just a record of where humanity had gone, it was a beacon, pointing the way toward where all sentient races might one day follow. As they made camp one final time in the shadow of the mountain, they began planning how to share what they'd learned with the 9 kingdoms. Some truths would have to wait, the world wasn't ready for everything they'd discovered. But they could begin preparing their people for the journey ahead. That night, watching the stars with their enhanced perception, they saw something they hadn't noticed before, a subtle pattern in the very fabric of space, protecting their world from forces they could barely comprehend. Somewhere out there, humanity was standing guard, giving them time to grow into their full potential. The mystery of humanity's disappearance had been solved, but it had been replaced by something far greater, the mystery of what they, and all the races of their world, might one day become. The journey back from Mount Monolith was harder than any of them had anticipated. Not because of physical challenges, their enhanced bodies made travel easier than ever, but because of the weight of knowledge they now carried. Each step away from the mountain felt like a step back into a world that seemed smaller, more limited than they'd ever realized before. "We can't tell them everything," Kissin said on their 3rd night of return travel. The mountain elf's enhanced vision caught glimpses of the energy patterns they'd learned to see, but they were growing fainter with distance. The 9 kingdoms aren't ready for the full truth. Rhaegar, who had been uncharacteristically quiet since their departure, finally spoke. "The dwarven kingdoms would tear themselves apart trying to replicate what we saw. All that technology, all those advances, it would drive them mad with desire." The twin orcs, Marn and Varn, shared a knowing look. Their people had always been considered the most warlike of the races, but what they'd learned in the mountain had shown them a different path. "Our people need to learn peace first," Marn said softly. "Before they can even begin to understand what's possible," Varn finished. Oregon, the forest elf, had spent their journey creating detailed maps, not just of their physical route, but of the energy patterns they'd observed. "Look at this," he said, spreading out his work. "The patterns aren't random. They're building up to something, like a slow transformation of the entire world." Utji's scales still held a faint glow, though it was gradually fading. The snake man had been the most affected by their experience, perhaps because his species was naturally more sensitive to energy patterns. "The humans didn't just leave us a message," he said. "They left us a choice. We can either fight among ourselves over their abandoned territories. Or we can prepare for what's coming." Ren finished, the Minotaur's deep voice carrying the weight of prophecy. "The void they showed us. It's real, and it's getting closer." As they made camp that night, a strange aurora danced across the sky, visible only to their enhanced senses. It reminded them of the patterns they'd seen in Mount Monolith, but on a vast, celestial scale. The humans hadn't just been building in one mountain, they'd been preparing the entire world. They spent that night drafting multiple versions of their report, trying to find the right balance between truth and responsibility. How do you tell the most powerful kingdoms in the world that everything they thought they were fighting for was meaningless compared to what was really at stake? "We start with the practical," Kissin suggested. "The immediate concerns." They drafted their first recommendation: the abandoned human territories should remain unclaimed, designated as neutral zones for joint research and exploration. The technology and resources left behind would be studied collaboratively, not competitively. Their second recommendation was more subtle, a proposal for a new council, composed not of political leaders but of scholars and mystics from all races, dedicated to studying the energy patterns the humans had left behind. But it was their third recommendation that would prove most controversial: a complete restructuring of how the Nine Kingdoms approached warfare and conflict. They had seen in the mountain that the humans' apparently aggressive nature had been purposeful, not meant to conquer, but to push other races to develop and adapt. "We need to teach them what we learned about the pattern," Oregon insisted. "Not everything, but enough to start them thinking differently about reality." They spent days refining their message, practicing how to present their discoveries in a way that would inspire rather than frighten. The humans had shown them that evolution of consciousness was possible, but it couldn't be rushed or forced. As they approached the first major city since their expedition, they began to notice changes in themselves that went beyond the physical transformations. Their minds worked differently now, seeing connections and possibilities that would have been invisible before. Utji was the first to realize what was happening. "The humans didn't just show us their path," he said. "They activated something in us. Potential that was always there, but dormant." They tested this theory and found he was right. Each of them had developed unique abilities that seemed to bridge the gap between their natural talents and what they'd seen in the mountain. Rhaegar could now read the history of any constructed object by touching it. The twin orcs could share thoughts and experiences across vast distances. Oregon could communicate with plants in ways that went far beyond traditional forest elf abilities. But with these gifts came a heavy responsibility. They weren't just carriers of information anymore, they had become living proof of what was possible. Their very existence would challenge everything the Nine Kingdoms thought they knew about reality. As they approached the border of the nearest kingdom, they made their final decision about what to share. They would reveal the existence of the mountain facility but not its full capabilities. They would speak of humanity's advancement but not their true destination. They would warn of future challenges but not the full horror of the void. Most importantly, they would demonstrate through their own transformed existence that change was possible, that evolution was not just a physical process but a cosmic one. The city walls came into view, and with them, the weight of normalcy threatened to crush their expanded awareness. But then Ren noticed something extraordinary: subtle energy patterns in the city's construction that they would never have seen before. The humans hadn't just been preparing themselves, they'd been preparing everyone, seeding the world with catalysts for advancement that would activate when the time was right. "Look," the Minotaur said, pointing to what appeared to be ordinary decorative patterns on the city gates. "They're everywhere. We just couldn't see them before." The patterns were indeed everywhere, in architecture, in nature, in the very layout of cities and roads. The humans had spent centuries weaving a web of awakening potential into the fabric of society itself. Their departure wasn't an end, it was the beginning of a process they had carefully engineered. As they prepared to enter the city and begin the next phase of their journey, each member of the party silently renewed their commitment to the truth they discovered. They weren't just returning with information, they were returning as seeds of transformation, planted by humanity's final and perhaps greatest act of preparation. The gates opened before them, and with their enhanced perception, they could see the subtle ripples their presence created in the energy fields around them. The next phase of evolution had begun, and they were its first conscious participants. Behind them, Mount Monolith pulsed with energy visible only to their transformed senses, a reminder of the legacy they now carried. Ahead lay the Nine Kingdoms, unaware that their world was about to change forever. The real question wasn't whether they would share what they'd learned, but how to guide their world through the transformation that was already underway. The Great Hall of Concordance had never hosted all 9 ruling councils simultaneously before. The vast chamber, built centuries ago as a neutral meeting ground, now held representatives from every kingdom, the stone-carved thrones of the dwarven holds, the living branches that formed the elven seats, the steel-forged chairs of the Orcish clans, and delegates from all the other races. The 7 adventurers stood at the center of this unprecedented gathering, their transformed nature visible to even the most mundane observers. Utji's scales rippled with patterns of light as he began their carefully prepared presentation. Honored leaders of the 9 kingdoms, he said, his voice carrying new harmonics that seemed to resonate with the very air. We return with answers about humanity's departure, but those answers lead to even greater questions. Over the next several hours, they shared their edited version of events. They spoke of Mount Monolith's technological wonders without revealing their true scope. They described humanity's advancement without detailing their dimensional transcendence. They warned of future challenges without naming the void directly. But it was their transformed presence that spoke louder than words. When Rhaegar touched the ancient stone table at the center of the hall, its history flickered in the air for all to see. When the twin orcs, Marn and Varn, demonstrated their new connection, the implications of evolved consciousness became impossible to ignore. The humans didn't abandon us, Oregon explained, causing plants throughout the hall to bloom with unprecedented vigor. They advanced beyond our current understanding, but they left us the tools and knowledge to follow our own path of evolution. Kisan unveiled their proposal for the future, the formation of a new organization called the Concordant Assembly, dedicated to studying the patterns and technologies humanity had left behind. Not to copy their path, he emphasized, but to discover our own. The reaction from the assembled leaders was complex and immediate. The dwarven Kingsmitha's eyes gleamed with technological possibilities. The elven high branches swayed with recognition of patterns they'd glimpsed in ancient forests. The Orcish war chiefs saw the potential for transformation beyond physical strength. But it was Ren who delivered the most crucial part of their message. The Minotaur's enhanced presence filled the hall as he spoke of unity. The humans didn't just leave us their knowledge, he rumbled. They left us a choice. We can fight over their abandoned territories, or we can recognize that we're standing on the brink of something far greater than our ancient rivalries. As if in response to his words, the patterns they'd learned to see in Mount Monolith began manifesting throughout the hall. The leaders gasped as their enhanced advisors and mystics started detecting energy signatures that had always been present but never before visible. The evidence was undeniable. Change was coming, not as a distant possibility but as an immediate reality. The humans hadn't just evolved themselves, they'd initiated a cascade of transformation that was already rippling through all 9 races. In the days that followed, the 9 kingdoms made their first truly unanimous decision in history. The Concordant Assembly was established, with the 7 adventurers as its founding members. The human territories were declared neutral zones for joint research and exploration. A new age of cooperation and discovery began. But it was what happened next that truly validated their decisions. 1 month after the Great Council, the first children were born showing signs of enhancement. A dwarven baby who could see energy patterns. An Orcish child who could communicate telepathically. An elven infant whose connection to nature exceeded anything seen before. The pattern of advancement that humanity had woven into the world was accelerating, but not chaotically. Each race was developing along its own unique path, their natural strengths and cultural wisdom serving as foundations for evolution rather than limitations to be overcome. The 7 adventurers found themselves serving as guides, helping each kingdom navigate its own transformation. They understood now why the humans had chosen to leave rather than simply share their advancement. Each race needed to find its own way, develop its own relationship with the greater reality they were discovering. Utji established the first Pattern Academy, teaching others to recognize and interact with the energy signatures that pervaded their world. Rhaegar led expeditions to study the hidden technologies in ancient ruins, discovering that humans had been seeding technological advancement throughout history. The twin orcs transformed their people's warrior culture into one of internal conquest, mastering consciousness rather than territory. Oregon and Kisan worked together to bridge the ancient divide between forest and mountain elves, showing how their different perspectives created a more complete understanding of reality. Ren traveled between kingdoms, his enhanced presence serving as a reminder of the greater transformation they were all experiencing. As the years passed, the 9 kingdoms began to understand what humanity had really done. They hadn't abandoned their world, they had graduated from it, leaving behind everything needed for others to follow in their own time and their own way. The mystery of humanity's disappearance became a story of hope, told to children as they discovered their own unique gifts. The feared collapse of civilization following humanity's departure became instead the beginning of a renaissance, with each race contributing its unique wisdom to the greater understanding of reality. And sometimes, on clear nights, those with enhanced perception could see subtle changes in the stars, signs that humanity was still out there, standing guard against forces they couldn't yet comprehend, giving their former neighbors time to grow into their full potential. The final message encoded in Mount Monolith's patterns became clear: evolution wasn't about becoming like humanity. It was about each race discovering its own path to transcendence, contributing its unique perspective to the greater tapestry of consciousness. As the first decade after humanity's departure drew to a close, the Nine Kingdoms had changed beyond recognition. The ancient walls between territories became research stations. Battlefields became schools of consciousness. The races that had fought for so long began sharing their discoveries, their unique paths of advancement enriching all. And somewhere, in dimensions beyond normal perception, humanity watched with satisfaction as their final and greatest project unfolded exactly as they had hoped. The seeds they had planted were growing, not into copies of themselves, but into something entirely new and wonderful. The story of humanity's mysterious exit became the story of everyone else's magnificent beginning. The greatest mystery wasn't where humanity had gone, it was what their former neighbors would become. And that story was just beginning.